Now, I mentioned at the start of the programme that it was revealed just as I was coming on air that the author J.K. Rowling is founding and personally funding a new female-only service for survivors of sexual violence in Edinburgh. I'm going to be speaking to the Daily Telegraph journalist Suzanne in a moment. She got the scoop on this story and has interviewed J.K. Rowling about it. But first, we wanted to look at the background, certainly the politics of this. The Scottish Government is planning to change the Gender Recognition Act to make the process quicker and removes the need for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria. It's being debated in Parliament. We'll go to a final vote this month, December the 21st. David Wallace-Lockhart, our political correspondent at Westminster, has been following this story and joins me now. Good morning.
Hi, Emma.
Can you remind us what the government is proposing, what Nicola Sturgeon has certainly come under attention for?
So the Gender Recognition Reform Bill will be up for its final vote next week at Holyrood, and it is expected to pass through quite comfortably. And the significant changes that piece of legislation will make, it means for anyone looking in Scotland to legally change their gender, they'll have to live in their acquired gender for just 3 months rather than the current rules, which are 2 years. And as you mentioned, they'll no longer need to go to a GP and get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Now, for fans of this legislation, they say that this just streamlines a process that can be incredibly complex for people who are transgender and want to legally change their gender. For critics of the bill, they're concerned about this move towards what they call self-ID and the idea of the effect that it could have on women's only spaces. Now, it has been a controversial piece of legislation. It's seen the biggest SNP rebellion since the SNP came to power in Scotland in 2007. 9 MSPs defying the whip on this. But as I mentioned, it does have the support of Labour. It's got the support of the Lib Dems, the support of the Greens, so it will pass, bearing any major upset quite easily next week.
And how does this differ to the current UK-wide rules? Because it's been reported that Kemi Badenoch, of course people remember her for trying to be Prime Minister in the latest race, the Minister for Women for the UK government is said to be concerned about this potential law change and has questioned how it would sit within the UK as a whole.
Absolutely, yeah. So once upon a time, when Theresa May was Prime Minister, actually, there was a feeling that the Scottish Government and the UK Government were moving broadly in the same direction on this, which would have made things probably, realistically, a lot less complicated. Problem is, Theresa May left and different Prime Ministers came in, but all took the same view that they didn't want to change the process for legally changing your gender in England and Wales. So longer timescale and the need for that medical diagnosis, that will persist in England and Wales. And the big question that raises there is complexities around when the law does change in Scotland. What happens if someone changes their gender legally in Scotland, gets one of those gender recognition certificates, legal acknowledgement your gender has changed, and then perhaps decides to move elsewhere in the UK? Well, I've been hearing from UK government sources that they may not recognise Scottish gender recognition certificates. That raises huge questions for complexities that could arise for someone who did change gender and then move elsewhere in the UK. And the idea of a legal challenge isn't even being ruled out, with concerns in the UK government about changes in Scotland potentially spilling over to affect areas that are reserved to Westminster. Scottish Government believes that this is a fully devolved issue and therefore there would not be grounds for the UK Government to challenge it legally.
But we don't yet know. Of course, it hasn't gone through, as you say. That's still to come, and then we don't know what will happen next. But it's a complex area which we wanted to make sure we filled in some of those blanks, perhaps for some of our listeners, on the politics of this and the context of this announcement by J.K. Rowling. David Wallace-Lockhart, stay with us for just a few more moments because I'm going to talk now a bit more about what the author has done. It's called, the place that she's founded, it's called Beira's Place. We invited J.K. Rowling onto Woman's Hour this morning. Actually, we've been told she isn't doing interviews. She has done one, and I'm going to speak to Suzanne, the journalist who's done that interview, in just a moment, but she isn't doing anything else, we're told, at the moment. But in a press release, J.K. Rowling has written the following. She says, "I founded Beira's Place to provide what I believe is currently an unmet need for women in the area. As a survivor of sexual assault myself, I know how important it is that survivors have the option of women-centred and women-delivered care at such a vulnerable time. Beira's place will offer an increase in capacity for services in the area and will, I hope, enable more women to process and recover from their trauma. Let's talk now to Suzanne Moore, who writes a column on her own newsletter, on her own Substack, and also for the Daily Telegraph. Good morning.
Hello, Emma.
Thanks for joining us today. And JK has spoken to you, JK Rowling, about this new service. We've heard about the name as well, and I believe you visited it.
Yes, I was lucky enough to go up and to see Beira's place.
And what is it like? What is the hope for it? She talks about an unmet need.
Well, the hope is to increase capacity. We know that rape is on the rise in England and in Scotland in the last year, 25%. It's to provide, as she said, women-centred services delivered by women, because all surveys show that that is what women ask for, especially in times of vulnerability and trauma.
And this is in response to, we just mentioned the political context. Is it in response to that? Is it also in response to the services that are already available not doing what she thinks needs to be done?
I think it's complex. I think some of it possibly is, but you have to understand that a project like this has been years in the making. This isn't suddenly, she's just decided to do this. She's gathered together a team of experts, people who've worked in rape crisis centres. And I think what she really wants to ensure is that this is not a charity that's subject to the whims of whoever is in power, whether that be the SNP or whoever, and that its funding is never under threat, because we have seen certain rape centres in the UK whose funding is under threat when women have refused to join in groups where it is not women only.
And let's get to that, because we've got a statement from Scotland Rape Crisis, which says, rape crisis services across Scotland are experiencing huge demand, as you were just talking about. This demand, combined with a lack of sustainable funding, is leading to some centres facing very difficult waiting lists. You've also just talked about that. And then it carries on to say, we of course welcome any new service which puts in place rigorous safeguarding procedures and is staffed by highly trained professionals to support survivors of sexual violence. But it goes on to say, it is crucial that the life-saving support offered by rape crisis centres is available to trans and non-binary people. All rape crisis centres services in Scotland offer support to trans women and have done so for 15 years. There has not been a single incident of anyone abusing this. We continue to see the path to equality for women and trans people as being deeply interconnected and dependent on shared efforts to dismantle systems of discrimination. What do you make of that, having interviewed JK Rowling about why she's doing this and been doing it for, planning it for years?
I think that one of the spurs for this was simply the statement that at a time when women are vulnerable, they should be re-educated and have any prejudice they might have reframed. And I think she felt that this just wasn't appropriate, and that she was answering, as she says, the unmet need for women to be treated only by women. It's really simple, and in some ways, it's really not got a lot to do with the whole trans issue and the incredibly complex politics of Scotland. It is to do with increasing capacity. And as someone tweeted to me, it's like, you're a feminist, you win the lottery. What do you do? JK could spend the rest of her life on a Caribbean island. We all know that. In fact, she is doing something to improve the lives of the most vulnerable people. And for that, I think it's just fantastic.
Why do you think she chose to talk to you? She famously doesn't do very many interviews.
Well, she chose to talk to me only on my Substack. She refused to do it for the press. We've met a couple of times. I think perhaps, I don't know, really. I don't know her very well, but I think we always have quite a laugh. That doesn't really come over in the interview because it's a serious subject.
Yes.
But I think she also recognises that while she has been under attack for standing up for the rights of women, so have I. So I think perhaps there's a bond there.
There's a bond there, and you do address that. She actually says in your piece that I was reading when it came out this morning that she doesn't consider herself cancelled, but she does talk about some of those threats and some of those responses that she has had.
Well, I mean, she lives under constant threat. Yes, she does, and for some ridiculous reason, since Rushdie was stabbed, the threat level increased.
Suzanne, well, lots more to say, but we wanted to make sure we spoke to you. This broke, as I say, we were just coming on air on your, as we mentioned there, Substack, your newsletter, which people may or may not be aware of, and they can read more context there. And I shared what J.K. Rowling had to say. To David Wallace-Lockhart, thank you for our political commentary there, who's been covering this story across Westminster and Scotland. And there will be more developments which we'll cover as they happen. Suzanne Moore, thank you. David Wallace-Lockhart, thank you. And thank you to you for your company this morning.